There you go. Should
All right,
work.
how about now? Is that a better? On Zoom, can you hear me? Thumbs up. All right, here we go. Good. Good to be together. I'm so glad you're here. I've got right at time, so we're gonna get started. Got a few announcements that I want to remind you of and kind of have you focus on. The first thing is if you're here with us in the room this evening, you'll notice we have some additional tables. And you might also wonder, why do we have there in Friendship Court even more tables? That's because tomorrow is Grandparents' Day. And so we will have 319 grandparents in these rooms here with the Children of the Weekday School who will be here. I'll be doing some things, and then we'll have a lunch blessing with them as well that another pastor will be doing. It's a great time. So a lot of fun. Additionally, I want to remind you that right around the corner after Grandparents' Day is spring break. And we said we were not going to meet during spring break, so we will not convene next Wednesday. So I just wanted to remind you of that. We'll be back together on the 22nd. Additionally, have any of y'all been to the Parable Project yet at lunch? A wonderful time. Reverend Meredith Wendy Mills was here today, did an outstanding job. We have more excellent preachers going to be here. It's an absolutely wonderful time. If you've only got a 1 hour lunch, you can make it. We start about 12:10 and are done by 12:45. And so people can get back and forth to work as possible. But it's a wonderful, wonderful time. And we've been having great attendance. There was plenty of food today, which was really good. Last week, it was a bit challenging when we had more people than anticipated show up. Additionally, I just want to remind you in this Lenten season, we have mdumc.org/Lent. And at that website, you can see all the various services and opportunities you have during the week to participate in this Lenten season and the run up to Easter. We are so thrilled and excited about Easter being around the corner, and I just want to draw your attention to that. But as we gather today, I thought that in this Lenten season, in this time of self-denial, that we might take on a prayer. I think I've shared this prayer book with y'all before, but I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's called Praying with Wesley. It's by De Silva, and it takes you through the daily prayers of John Wesley that he wrote up for his life and time. Now, you'll be happy to know that although John Wesley insisted that Methodists needed to train themselves to get up at 4:30 a.m. in the morning and pray for 2.5 to 3 hours before the rest of the day began, De Silva made those prayers into about 15 minutes. Okay? Thank you, De Silva. And I'm only going to read you about a 5-minute prayer. Okay, so please, it will seem a little bit long for our ears, but it's not a full 3 hours. But I want to just give you a little bit of the flavor of these prayers of John Wesley. So let us pray. This is the morning prayer. Lord Jesus, my way, my truth, and my life. You have said that I can follow you only by denying myself. You have diagnosed my disease, namely self-love, a self-serving heart, and slavery to my own ambitions, desires, and emotions. This has been my idolatry, to serve myself as my God, to please myself, to do my own will. Your own example is my cure. Although you made all things for your pleasure, you did not please yourself, but made yourself a servant of all. You allowed yourself to be insulted, ridiculed, and nailed to a cross for me. How can I hesitate to renounce myself for you? Let me not presume to set myself above my master, to do not my will, but the will of God. I am too much addicted to preserving physical comfort, to indulging myself, to insulating myself from any unpleasantness. Free me from this addiction so that I can serve you with my whole being and not merely give you what is left over after I have served my ease and excess. Give me the grace to walk in your steps and to take up my cross daily. Help me this day to set aside any pleasure or desire that does not have you as its ultimate goal. Let me abstain from any pleasure that will not prepare me better to take pleasure, in you. Keep me from being distracted by the pleasures that the world entices me to pursue, which would only entangle me and keep me from drawing closer to you. Cause me to be aware of where my senses, appetites, and emotions would carry me, and let me resist every movement that will not honor you or advance your good in this world. Let me have a small victory over these impulses today, that I may hope for a greater victory tomorrow. Strengthen me to practice fasting, prayer vigils, and other spiritual disciplines. Let me accustom myself to small deprivations, that so no deprivation will ever cause me to be disloyal or disobedient to you. For your love, your grace, and your mercy are more precious to me than anything imaginable of this world. Fill me with your grace and action. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Isn't that beautiful? Beautiful. If anybody wants to see the book later, I'll be happy to show them this, but I highly recommend it. It's got it 7 days a week. It's good for any time of the year. That's the one on mortification. You all may have heard of mortification before. The most common way we use that word today is we say, we have been mortified, right? To be in horror or just shocked by something, we're mortified. But mortification just means about the body. And mortification specifically means to deny your body, to deny your bodily need. And so in this book, in Wesley's tradition, as he worked on that virtue of mortification, he did that on Wednesday and Fridays. Okay, are the 2 days. There are other virtues in there, and we'll commend them all to you, but it's quite fun. Not appropriate for Lent. Well, friends, I hope you're ready today to recognize a few things in Matthew. I'm hoping that at this point of our journey together in week 7, there are some things that you already know. Having been together and gone through this for a while now, although we've picked up some new people, and don't worry, you can come along with us. You're not going to be left out. But I want you to know that we've noticed some things in the book of Matthew. Matthew loves patterns and things that are predictable. So let's look at slide 2. We're going to put it up here. And I wonder, have any of you ever made a quilt? Have anyone seen somebody making a quilt? Do you even just like a quilt, or is Houston too hot for you to have a quilt? Quilts are pieced together pieces of cloth, often put in a pattern. Now, there are some people, they just cut up all the pieces of cloth, they just throw them all together, they lay them out, and they kind of put them together haphazardly. But there are other people who do beautiful things with the stitch work. They make patterns and precise kind of repeating geometric shapes and other things that are beautiful and aesthetically pleasing to bring together these things in a whole. So which one is Matthew? Did I mention he likes patterns? He is going to have everything precisely planned and laid out for a reason. So there's some patterns you've already seen so far. The first you might have forgotten, but it's right there in the naming of Jesus. Do you remember I told you to pay attention to verse 1, chapter 1 of the book of Matthew? So what does he say in verse 1, chapter 1 of Matthew? What does it say? It says, Jesus is who? Son of David, son of, there's another one, Abraham, and the Son of God, or Messiah, right? Sounds a lot like Messiah with a ma on the front of it, right? And the whole point of this book is to show you this over and over and over again. And you see this pattern coming through very clearly in the naming of Jesus, there in verse 1, chapter 1, but also too in the lineage that is part of their naming. Where in a pattern, he shows you very clearly how what he just said is true. But it doesn't stop there. He then runs it to the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is saying, Hey, he's son of David, son of Abraham, son of God, or the Messiah, right? And over and over and over, you hear that all the way through in the miracles and the other teachings and the parables in all of these parts. He's running that through every time. It's a pattern, and it's good to be mindful of it as we continue to move forward. The second thing is, if you're wondering why something happens in that, why does Matthew include this story out of Mark and not that story? Why does he bring forth this idea where Luke brings forth another idea? And Lord knows what our friend John was saying over there. It doesn't seem to always jive. Why does Matthew include what he includes and leave out other things at time? It's because Matthew is obsessively concerned with what fulfills Scripture. So if you have any question about why is something going on, why does it matter in Matthew? Why does Matthew put it in? It's because it fulfills a promise of God that's yet to be fulfilled, that can only be fulfilled by the son of David, the son of Abraham, the Messiah. Right? Those names are then categories under which all these promises could be laid. Because God made them through them, right? And then you might remember my cheerleading moment, the big X, the big chi, the chiastic structure that he loves. Did I mention he likes patterns? It looks like a quilt. And when you put it together in this big X, he would start with something at the beginning that makes several arguments, and then those arguments are mirrored as it goes out of the argument, and in the center is the most important thing. And we saw that most clearly in the Sermon on the Mount. We're at the middle of what was a sermon on the 10 Commandments, and we expect to see honor your mother and father and live long and prosper in the land, right? Instead, he says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and changes that. So these are all patterns we've seen before. So I want you to kind of hold on to them as we go into this week. Yes, this is called the setup, right? And I want to focus in on another pattern you're familiar with. When Jesus does this, I need to know kind of what's going on. Every time, right before Jesus is about to say something important, what does he do? He sits down. Why? Because Jesus is not a Protestant. He is speaking authoritatively for God. Right? And Protestants is when the tradition came that he stands up. In fact, we'll have a scene today where Jesus is preaching. You know how this should work on a Sunday morning? I get to sit up front. And y'all are all supposed to stand up. And I know somebody earlier today said, but Pastor Brad, if you were Jesus, we would stand up. That's pretty good. Pretty good comeback. Fair enough. So, but what I want to point out to you is that there's a kind of an expectation that goes with this. There's a pattern you see. So this pattern is Jesus is going to sit. There are crowds that are going to be present. Jesus is going to be speaking, and then the crowds are amazed. You already saw this at the Sermon on the Mount. 3 weeks worth, right? I mean, I walked you through it in great detail, but I don't want you to miss the big pattern because it's going to be a part of what's going on. So let's go to the next slide. Matthew's patterns, we see them in this list of parables that we have in chapter 13 in the ways he's going to talk. His love for these patterns just shines through. Now, we should recognize this pattern because what happens here in 13:1, it says that same day. So the same day that he healed somebody on the Sabbath, later that Saturday afternoon, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. What's going to happen? Is he resting? No, this means he's about to have a big teaching moment. And it says in verse 2, such great crowds gathered around him, because we know that if Jesus says, who's going to be there? The crowd, right? On the previous slide, gathered around him that he got in a boat. So the crowd is so great, Jesus had to get up and get in the boat. And friends, he double sits. That's like saying really, really important. He gets out on this boat and sits down again. Why? And I think I've explained this before previously. It's because the shore there is very steep and it forms like a natural amphitheater. All these people are standing there on the shore, and a boat that's only as far as I am to you is where Jesus is sitting, and he's able to talk back to the people there on the shore. And that's what's kind of going. And he told them many things in parables, saying, listen. Now, he's not just going to say, listen at the beginning of this parable. He's going to say, listen at the end. So can you imagine something so important that Jesus is going to double sit down and he's going to say, listen, listen. I don't know about you, friends, but if the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham, says, listen, listen, and sits down twice, I want to understand and know what he's saying. You? All right, let's see. Okay. The people will be astounded. Let's go on to the next slide. The parable of the sower. He says, listen, a sower went out to sow, the seeds fell, and on the path, they were all picked up by birds and carried off. On the rocky ground, they could take root. They grew up quick, but as soon as the sun came out because they had no depth to get water from, they were scorched up, they withered, and they died. The other ones were thrown out, and they were in amongst thorns. And as they grew together, the thorns just choked them out, and they died. But there were some that were put in good soil and brought forth grain. Let anyone who has ears listen. Now, when I was younger, I preached that sermon there in Texarkana, and a guy, Bob, he sat there and said, Pastor Brad, have you ever grown anything? And I was like, well, no, sir, I haven't. Some shrubs in my parents' house, when I was a kid, I helped my dad plant them, and I grew them. And so he's like, no, like produce or something that you had to eat. And I said, no, I don't, because I was having trouble just kind of things that were like 40-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. I mean, I don't know about you, but like my portfolio of stock is not performing at 100-fold right now. It's kind of headed in another direction, or 60-fold. I'd take 30-fold right now, right? Right. So I was trying to think about it and what it was. And as I was going there, I realized I had no reference, and he was right. And so Bob, he sits there and says, well, Brad, I have this thing for you. And he brought me to this little itty bitty vine. It barely was like a leaf of grass. It was something, y'all know what heirloom tomatoes are? Right? That thing grew up and it took over the fence. And if I had that another fence, it would have kept on going. And it didn't produce one tomato, it produced hundreds of tomatoes. It made the 100 produce look like nothing. It's amazing to watch this, right? So I got a new understanding of something that's fruitful and produces. That there's something else in this listen, sit down, and this fruitfulness at the end. And of course, this is an age, he's not a first century farmer. This is Van Gogh here on the left, if you're not familiar with Seed Caster at Sundown or Sober at Sundown. That's that painting. But on the next one, on slide 5, let's take a look. When Jesus says, listen, there's going to be a difference in verse 10 about how the disciples respond versus the crowd. The disciples aren't satisfied with what they just heard. I mean, the crowd, we could be kind of nice to them. I mean, the thing that characterizes the crowd was a bunch of people who were sick, that were seeking healing. There were people out of the synagogue who had seen Jesus do miraculous things. There were also people who had come down, they were kind of the feds. They had come down for Jerusalem to see if they couldn't bust Jesus. All right, so all of that group is who's gathered on the shore. But the disciples want more. They want to understand. So something you may not know is that the word understand, and specifically this word from Greek that means to understand or to know something inside so that you act out of it, right? Because for Matthew, there's no understanding that doesn't actually involve action or doing, right? That word is in our Bible several times, but never more than in Matthew. In Matthew, it's 26 times. And I want to show you that in it, this understanding referring to the kingdom of God happens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in this one little chapter or story. What do you think it's about? It's about understanding the kingdom of heaven in such a way that it prompts you or leads you to action, to doing something. And so the disciples ask the question about what is it they want to understand. If the people need to listen, the question they ask, why does Jesus speak to them in parables? Friends, why does Matthew do anything or capture anything about Jesus, right? It's because it fulfills a prophecy that shows Jesus is the son of David, son of Abraham, the Messiah, son of God, right? It's all there. So what does Jesus say? Let's turn and look. This is found in 13 verses 11 through 15. And here it says, Jesus answered, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they, that word again, understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you will indeed listen but never understand. You will indeed look but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull. Ooh. I mean, that's odd. How can a people's heart grow dull? I mean, I know that sight can grow dull. I have glasses. I had to have cataract surgery. I've seen that happen, right? I've actually don't hear like I used to. I know that can grow dull, right? But how does a person's heart grow dull? I mean, certainly that doesn't happen today. In no way do we ever become compassion fatigued. In no way do we ever allow other people around us to dehumanize other human beings. Never do we allow our partisanship to be more important than the soul of our enemy. Oh no, we never do that. Or walk by a person on the street and pretend they don't exist. We would never do that. But apparently back in Jesus' time, apparently sometimes people's hearts would grow dull and their ears hard of hearing, and they shut their eyes so that they, not because they couldn't see, but because they didn't want to see, right? They shut their eyes so that they might not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and understand with their heart and turn. And if they would turn, I would do it. I would go. And he goes on to say, blessed are your eyes. This is for the disciples. Blessed are the disciples' eyes, for they see, and the disciples' ears, for they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. They asked. Why? Disciples asked and are blessed. The crowd will also be told a little bit later, will not be told anything without a parable. But to those who choose to be disciples and follow Jesus closely, all will be shared and revealed. Next slide. And Jesus doesn't How many of you have ever read parts of the Bible and you say, oh man, I wish somebody would explain this to me? Has anybody ever had that? Is that why you're here tonight? Because we're breaking it down for you? But this is the beautiful part of this. Jesus explains Jesus' own parable to the disciples. And I wish I had this on everything he ever said. We call it Jesus on Jesus, right? I mean, it'd be great. But here he breaks it down for us, and he runs us now through this parable again. He says the seeds fell on the path, and it's the evil one that snatches the seeds away. And then they fell on the rocky ground, right? These are people who received with joy, but are not able to withstand trouble or persecution. Because nobody ever leaves a church when things get tough, do they? Right? No one ever gets upset about things and just goes the other way. I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? Nobody falls away from their faith based on a hardship that they're facing or a difficult circumstance in their family, right? Right? We all stand strong. And others fell in among thorns, and the lure of wealth choked out the ability of the vine to produce, of the seed to make what was intended, the fruit for which it bears, right? The understanding of the compassion they've known in God. And on good soil, the one who hears understands, and in understanding, they bear fruit. And I shorthanded it for you. They do. They do what God commands. They do what God calls. They live out life, knowing the reality and blessing of God. It's amazing. And so here we have the parable of the sower explained. And shortly after, I can only imagine why, but Jesus gives a second parable about a sower. It's kind of interesting. I think that some people must have been asking and unrelentingly, well, what do you mean about the sower? And help me understand. And there are all these things that are happening together. And I mean, also too, like, no sower does that. No sower works that hard to get all that wheat back together so that you've saved it all year long, so that you can have your family's harvest next year, and then you just go throw it. Like, they know how this happens. You don't throw seed on it. What kind of crazy sower is this? You don't throw it on the rocks. You definitely don't throw it into it. Are you kidding me? Is that how y'all would do it? No, you prepare a plot of land, you get it perfectly ready, you make sure all year it's good, and then you plant it in that soil. So now we get a second sower parable. Because I think Jesus heard that and said, okay, well, let me tell you about that. He says, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, right? He's going to, she didn't get that. I want them to get it. You don't have to get it. So, you have the kingdom of heaven, right? May be compared to a sower sowing good seeds in their field, right? So this sower goes and puts the seed in the field. It's a perfectly prepared field. We are told the seed is good. And then he goes to sleep after a hard day's work because he doesn't want to get some rest before the next day. And while he's sleeping, guess what happens? An enemy comes and puts seeds of weeds in amongst the weeds. Now, I know what you're thinking here, because the servants come and the servants say, let us pull out those weeds and we'll protect the weed. Because you think it's Texas dollar weed in your St. Augustine, right? Anybody ever put some of that spray stuff on it? Yeah, be careful with that. It's bad for you now, right? They've gotten that clear. But you go out there, how many of y'all go out and are weeding your yards right now? Anybody getting the weeds out of the flower bed? Right? See, that's not the way the weeds and these weeds work. The weeds that they had that would grow in the wheat fields at that time, their roots would go down and try to take the nutrients away from the other roots and would get all intertwined with them. And so if you pull up one, it's just as likely that the other will die as well. So they become intertwined. And so what happens is the master tells them, the sower tells them, let them both grow until they're mature. Then at the time of the harvest, I will send you back in, and then you will grab and you will bundle together all of the weeds, and you will throw them in the fire. And it's really interesting. It goes ahead and says, for there will be weeping and much gnashing of teeth, which, why are weeds weeping and gnashing of teeth? A little kind of weird, right? But then the wheat will all be gathered into bundles and brought into my Father's warehouse. So all that's there. And in case you're confused at this point, it's okay, because guess what? Jesus explains it again. The disciples go to Jesus in 34 and 35. He kind of anticipates their questions, gets ahead of them, and actually answers the questions for him. And now on slide 8, we'll go to it. You get the explanation of the second parable of sowing, right? The disciples wanted it explained, they get it explained. The sower is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The weeds are the children of the devil. The enemy is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the reapers, those servants who went to bring it in, are the angels. And then it goes on to say that I will send to separate these two kind of groups. Okay, you've heard this before. You may not remember it, but at the end of Matthew, there's going to be a story, and we're told that before the glory of the Lord, all the nations will be gathered, all the families of all the earth, and then Jesus will call out and separate each family and each group into the sheep and y'all heard it? Remember? And then these two lines will come. One will be sent away from God forever. The other will be set apart for glory with him. And the ones who were being sent away said, Jesus, what went wrong? What did he say? Whatever you did to the least of these, you did unto me. Remember that? And this parable is that same story, being separated into these ways. And remember that always in these parables, you have a carrot and a stick. You have something that draws you to God and a reminder that you don't want it. And it's more than you can probably wrap your mind around, but it's important that we know with clarity the existential consequences of what are being said. But even better, the Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin. The field will be purified. And then what's even better than that, how many of y'all sung that song, Amazing Grace? Have any of y'all heard that one? All right, one of the most popular songs of all time. Do you remember there's this old hymn of it, old kind of last verse, it goes something like, when we've been there 10,000 years, and it says, bright shining as the sun. Y'all remember that? Do you ever wonder where that came from? Right, because remember in the book of Revelation, who shines? Jesus. He becomes the stars and the moon and the sun. We don't have to have light anymore because the radiant love of Jesus is our day and our night and our light of all life. But here in Matthew, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Now, they're not incompatible. I mean, God's love will shine through us in a way. I think everyone will be illuminated in eternity, but you just get that beautiful image of the end of time. And what he's talking about is this blessing that we have in Jesus. And then there are more parables. So let's go to slide 9. You get a parable about a mustard seed, that is the smallest of all the seeds. right? But the kingdom of heaven is like it, because even that little seed can produce something so much more, a tree where the birds of the air can take nest and make their home. There's yeast that when you leaven bread, when you put that yeast in the bread, something that's small, and of that flour, you add some water, and the next thing you know, it multiplies 2 or 3 times in size. The kingdom of heaven is like that. It's like the treasure in a field. The kingdom of heaven is so precious and valuable that when you came across a treasure in the field and you realized how valuable it is, you didn't say anything to anybody, but you went back home and you sold everything you had. And then you approached the owner of the field. Hey, you know that acre over there you're not doing anything with? Well, today's your lucky day. I'll take it off your hands. I'll make you a great deal. Because you know that that treasure is more valuable than anything you've ever owned. It's like the merchant of fine pearls, who, when they come across that perfect pearl, that thing that shows the full beauty of all creation, that they realize its value. The trained understand, the untrained just walk by. And yet they would literally sell everything they have and leverage all their holdings to possess that one pearl if they know its value. This is how the kingdom of heaven is. And then you get this other one that's a lot grosser. It's like a net thrown into the sea. What? And he pulls it back in. And there's all kinds of just random fish and stuff and junk. And well, it's not today, there wouldn't be a tire. Right, we are working on the Pacific garbage patch, right? It's finally going down a little bit. I think they said in the last thing, hopefully that'll get better. But it's not a bunch of plastic bottles and other things that kill animals in the sea, but they're pulling out all this other stuff. And we're told they're sorting through it. What fish are useful and good and have value, and what do not? I mean, this is Jesus after he said, listen, listen, and had a double sit down, telling these parables and stories now to his disciples. And then in slide 10, we'll go to the next slide. Jesus asks the disciples, have you understood all this? Right, remember I asked you that earlier? Right, that's good. Have you understood all this? They answered yes, because what else are you going to say? He might call on me, right? Scribes for the kingdom of heaven are like a master of a home who brings out new and old treasures to show their guests. Laura and I are so blessed in our home. We have 2 kind of very precious family heirlooms that we have in the same room. We've got a piano where 7 generations of Laura's family have learned how to play. And then we have a chess table my parents got when they were in the army that's from Spain. That's there, it's beautiful, and it's kind of big table, and it has chairs that go with it, these large carved pieces. And if you suffer a trip to my house, guess what you're going to have to see? Right? And it says that scribes are so proud and amazed by what God has done that they bring out the new thing they have, but also the old things. Because for Matthew, the entire truth of God is being made known in Jesus. And from beginning through the prophets, the Psalms, the Proverbs, through now Jesus. It's the same message all the way through. The promise that we serve a God of grace and compassion who loves us and wants to understand how when we're willing to place our trust and faith in God, God will lead us to things beyond what we can imagine, to a value and place of belonging and being that is greater than anything we can value. And oh yeah, if you don't want to go that way, the other one will be back. But there's this focus on this. And just after that, the disciples get it, we're clear about what it is. Jesus tries to return to Nazareth and goes and teaches in the synagogue there in Matthew's account. Y'all remember the other gospel accounts? How did it go when Jesus went back home? They were just, oh, hey, we're so happy to see you. Come on and teach us everything you know. Right? They kind of didn't go that way. Now, the good news is in Matthew's account, they don't want to kill him, right? That's kind of, you find that in Luke, a little bit in Mark. Here, it's a little bit different. They want to know a different set of questions. They're not trying to understand what Jesus is saying or why he's saying it. What they're trying to ask themselves is, where did Jesus get all this wisdom and power from? And they took offense at him because, well, we know, isn't his mom over there and his dad this person and there's his brothers and sisters. Don't ever believe Dan around people. We've always been Jesus had siblings, okay? Like don't listen to all that other nonsense in those books a few years ago. But there you kind of go down this offense at him, and we're told that the reason he could not do works of power was because they didn't understand, which is the same Greek word that is unbelief. And so it's the opposite of what we've just heard. Understand. No, the people there in the synagogue where he grew up, they don't understand. And because of their unbelief, he couldn't do anything. Next slide. And then, in case we accidentally believe the disciples, yes, a spoiler alert, friends, they don't really understand. What ends up happening is Herod kind of shows up on the stage. Now, you might remember the king Herod at the beginning of the story. This is now Herod Antipas II. There's actually about 3 Herods. You know you're a bad dude when people keep naming themselves after you because you were so ominous and powerful, and they hope that their name will keep everybody in alignment. But anyway, here we got the second Herod. And this Herod really didn't like it when people pointed out their flaws. You know, sometimes when you have a ruler and their flaws are pointed out, they get kind of mean. Okay? And so John the Baptist had pointed out how wrong it was that he had married and taken his brother's wife and basically had him killed and then brought her into his, whatever you want to call it, harem stable, whatever. You know, so like there's a problem there. And then he has a birthday. Now, the birthday here is kind of like, it's different than mine. I mean, I had a birthday just a few days ago, and I mean, I don't remember any dancing at the parties I was part of, but apparently this dancing was quite something. In fact, it got so carried away that Herodias' daughter danced in a way that led a drunk Herod to proclaim out to everybody that she could have anything she wanted, even up to half of his kingdom. Now, Herodias, not missing a beat, said, well, hey, daughter, you know, we never learned her actual name. It's kind of true. But he says, hey, daughter, get me the head of John the Baptist on fire. Now Herod's in a bit of a bind because he can't, like, not honor what he said. I mean, never mind, he was drunk and it was his birthday and he got a little carried away. So now he ends up having to do that. He already had him arrested. But you see, Herod was a despot and a kind of bad dude, but he wasn't stupid. Like, he knew the people like John the Baptist, and he was kind of afraid that if he killed them, there'd be trouble. And he didn't want an uprising, he didn't want to fight a battle. So it was better to just keep him in prison. But now he's had to kill him and put that out there. We're then told that John's disciples bury the body and go to tell Jesus. And Jesus then tries to withdraw to a deserted place. Because what else do you do when you learn that your friend and your mentor is dead? The person who has blessed you in an amazing way just a few chapters ago, that baptized you and showed the importance of who you are. And so he withdraws. But what happens? We're told on the next slide, we'll go to slide 12. The crowds follow Jesus. And although Jesus is on a boat, he sees the crowds on the shore who were sick, who were wounded, who were infirm. You still think this isn't about compassion? He was moved with compassion and he stopped the boat. I mean, Herod just killed John the Baptist and Jesus might be next. And on the way to safety, he stops the boat and comes out on shore and not only heals a couple of people, we're told he begins healing and heals so many people, prays with so many families, cares for so many people who have lost their loved ones, that they're in that place. He stays until it gets dark. But what are the disciples for? Well, they want safety. And don't they know Jesus just lost somebody? Doesn't he need a break? You think there's a part of him that maybe says, isn't this time supposed to be for us? To spend time with Jesus? What are all these other people doing here? And there's just a practical side. We're in a wilderness area. Jesus, send him back to town. It's getting dark. It's not going to be safe. Get him back to town before it gets too late. What did Jesus say? You feed them. I mean, what? They're like, Jesus, all we have are 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I mean, have you ever had a child that wouldn't clean up the ring? And they would come up with every excuse imaginable under the sun not to do it, or work a task and not want to get it right because they knew that if they got it wrong enough, eventually you would say what Jesus says, bring that over here to me, right? But Jesus has this kind of parental moment, bring this over here to me. And then we're told Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He blesses it. He breaks it. He gives it out. And friends, 12 baskets of food were picked up. I mean, one basket, half of a basket could hold 5 loaves and 2 fishes. 12 baskets are filled up. And I know you're going to say, okay, well, Pastor Brad, it talks about organizing them and setting them in order and some engineers trying to figure this out. It's a miracle. It is supposed to be a miracle. It's to show you who this is. You remember chapter 1, verse 1. He is the son of David, of Abraham, son of God, the Messiah. If you didn't know that, you should know now. Why didn't the disciples, who said they understand the power of compassion, why were their hearts dull? He is done. And so he sends his disciples on. Now, Matthew makes it sound really nice, but he just says, get out of here. All right, let's look at the next slide. He sends them over to the other shore. It's a little short in Greek here on verse 13. So he sends them over there because he's just done with them. Jesus goes on the mountain. Well, first of all, he dismisses everybody else and takes care of everybody who's still there till late in the night. Then he goes up the mountain by himself. Then he goes down and begins to cross the lake to go over to where he's sent his disciples. And he's walking across the lake. The disciples see him and are scared out of their mind. Their boat had gotten caught in the wind and wasn't making any progress going into the wind. And so there, as he's walking by, they think it's a ghost. I mean, do they not know me by now? I mean, do they not know who Jesus is? Right, there's that old song, if you don't know me by now, right? I mean, they're never going to get to know him. Yes. But Peter, Jesus says, don't be afraid, it is I. And Peter says, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come out here. I mean, do you know how frustrated Jesus must be by now? All right, let's go to slide 14. Jesus replies, come. So Peter actually begins walking on the water. And he's going toward Jesus. And as he approaches Jesus, he sees the wind. And he becomes frightened. And he begins to sink. And he yells out, Lord, save me. And Jesus grabs him. And I know what you're thinking here. Peter said he got it, he didn't get it. Pretty bad for Peter. But I wonder, do any of us ever doubt? Do any of us ever have fear? Do any of us ever take our eyes off of Jesus because of what's going on in our life or with our loved one or during our loss or what we perceive to be suffering? When we keep our eyes on Jesus, we're there. Jesus admonishes him. Jesus catches them. You of little faith, why did you doubt? I mean, have you ever just said, if Jesus, if I could just be with you, if I could meet you, if you could be there, if I could know you, if I could see you, if I had experienced this, somehow I would have faith. And here is Peter, the rock upon whom Jesus will build his church. Doubt. You today live at a time after an empty tomb in the days of the resurrection. You know more than Peter. You have more reason to believe, more reason to be assured, more reason to not doubt. And yet how easy it is for us to take our eyes off Jesus. They get in the boat, the wind ceased, and now everybody praises Jesus on the boat. They go over to the Gennesaret shore on the other side, and we'll go to the next slide. And when they get there, they recognize Jesus. The Gennesaret shore, what happened over there? Does anybody remember? Is that maybe where remember the pigs? The swine, a little bit, the kind of the wet bacon? This is a shame. That should be allowed, but all of that, yeah, it's over there, right? Remember the woman who came all the way to Jesus and he was on the way to Jairus' house to heal his daughter, and Jesus feels power go out from the fringe of his garment, and he says, "Hey, what's going on?" You know where she was from? This other place, right? So here we are, and we're told that people, the word went out because they're like, "Oh, we know who that is," right? And people gathered and they begged that they might even touch the hem of his garment. And out of his compassion, after he had said many times not to bless the Gentile, all who touched it were healed. So what do we make of these things? Right, some faith building from the text, because we said that we're going to do this each time. I want to draw you to our last slide here, the next slide. I just picked a few things here. You seek to understand what the kingdom of heaven is like today. I mean, all these parables talked about it, right? You wonder about how our doubt seems to not really capture who God is, and we don't have the confidence in Jesus when we face the fears of our own life. Might be worth a question. Have you heard that question of Peter? You of little faith, why do you doubt? Jesus has promised that he is with us until the end of the age. And for all who believe, he is there with us. And then I wonder, would the fringe of Jesus' cloak be enough? Believe and yearn for that. Friends, following Jesus is not for the faint of heart, but the blessings it does bring are greater than anything we can fathom or imagine. For all who believe and place their trust in the Lord, receive the redeeming power of God on their side, in their corner, always. I say this as a person who's had a heck of a day. Right before I came here tonight, I learned that my aunt's surgery has gone really badly, and she may not make the night. And I say that to say, no words I could offer my mom for her sister will ever be enough to make up for the pain in her heart right now. and the anguish my family feels at the loss of somebody we love and what we will consider an untimely demise should be this evening. We also pray for Sophia and the hope that she will make it and that the doctors in the room will somehow be part of God's healing miracle in her life. But what I want you to know is the love of God and the grace of the life she lived because of her faith is the pearl of great price. Life that is without faith isn't worth living. Every moment we have with God and with Jesus, with the love and compassion Jesus can bring into our heart, is better than lifetimes without it. I mean, I stand here in front of you as a person redeemed by the grace of God. And every moment I have is borrowed time. I can tell you that I've had weeks in ministry where I laughed, cried, and prayed more than I did in years of my lifetime. Because life is better and more full when we're following Jesus. And so if you leave here tonight without the urgency of thinking and reflecting on how are you following Jesus this Lent, I want you to just encourage you to reconsider that. We can follow Jesus every day. It isn't about how we feel or what befalls us. It's whether or not our heart is aligned with God who is redeeming the world. But whether or not I pass by or my aunt passes by, we are part of the story of God's redeeming love for the world that will continue until it is done. Friends, that's the best news the world can ever receive. And I just felt like I should say that tonight. We're going to try to do it without saying it, but I'll do that. Love you all. Have a great night. I'll answer questions. Sorry, I was just kind of preaching. Yeah.
It's still personally to God that you are. He came, like, people, good people are living with God, right? And accepting God. God's will with no issue to that. Right. Yet, he keeps us in paradise. They're really only,
Yeah.
but they didn't understand.
Yeah, so what is Jesus teaching parables to people? I mean, there's some legitimacy to the Doug's Cypress question. I mean, for Matthew, the answer is easy, right? For Matthew, it's because, well, Scripture said he would. It's a bit like saying, why are children born that way? It's kind of a messy, weird way to birth children. But it's the way nature has chosen and God has ordained, and that's how it happens, right? I mean, so it's kind of a, why does God save the world in that way? I mean, I don't pretend to know all the inscrutable knowledge of God. I do try to hold on to the fringes of the garment that I can grab. I would say that I think that when we're talking about that question specifically, I think that I don't know why in that time Jesus doesn't go ahead and give that explanation to everyone. Probably he doesn't feel it will matter. Because it's interesting, those that hear and aren't satisfied with what they hear or are uncertain about understanding, they pursue Jesus till they find out. So is Jesus looking for followers who don't actually pursue God until they find out understanding and action? I think that's a bigger question. I think there is no such thing as cheap grace in Matthew's gospel. I think the grace is incredibly expensive, and I think the bar for those who will follow Jesus is incredibly high. I believe it's a very high ask to ensure that we're doing these things. Because the issue is not that, I mean, I look out in this room and I know some of y'all. Y'all do a lot of really good stuff in the name of Jesus and for God, right? But the question is Jesus seems to say in these different parables that you're either in or out. Well, what if I get it right 99 times, but I miss one question? Does that mean I'm out? Well, so the answer, of course, to that is no. Because the grace of God catches the disciples. I mean, the other thing too about the boat story is Jesus does actually catch Peter. Peter doesn't drown. But our fears in our course of faith will try to take us away. They'll try to drown us and move us to places that we should never go. But it's partially because we're human. So what do you do with Jesus struggling with our humanity? I think it's amazing that Jesus tries to teach us at all. I think it's phenomenal to think that even in the smallest way, we might share in and be part of God's compassionate vision of the world. The idea that you and I are the chosen vehicle by which God will save humanity is just mind-blowing. I heard a story today somebody was telling. They were talking about their spouse, and they were sharing that their faith was shaped because their spouse invited them to church. They said, you know, my spouse doubts, wonders, sometimes is all in and other times is kind of unsure. But I'm a follower of Jesus because they invited me to be part of the community. And there I met the Lord. I find that fascinating. I think sometimes we want to, when we read Matthew especially, I want to like make it harder than it is. But I do think while there's no cheap grace, there is grace, and that grace meets us as we try. But I just want to warn you about Matthew. Matthew's the one who says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I will say, I did not know you because you were not about my Father's business. Right? But he also said that we go and we teach and we preach and we pray, and that all these people will be sought out and found because God's love will not somehow go unfulfilled. And what God has promised will be increased. So it's a weird, it's a balance. And I think it's good. I think we, you know, you thought the prayer I prayed earlier was accidental. It's because it was talking about what Carol's talking about. I think that kind of love of comfort, avoidance of anything difficult or challenging, taking the easy route that's part of human nature, and surrounding ourselves with wealth that shows out the ability to be fruitful. I think that's a real phenomenon in the Bible. But it was a real phenomenon in Jesus' time. That's why he talks about it. I think it continues to be a problem today. How do we go order from Amazon? Don't bring it to the house. DoorDash, Uber Eats, y'all familiar with them? They'll bring it to you. When was the last time you ordered a meal from someone else? And send it to their house because you knew they were in need. Just curious. I'm not saying we're becoming more selfish as a society. Kind of hard not to do everything for us. Do you realize that all of us live in a better world than inherit? We could have more on our doorstep like that. Who needs that green and genie? You can just proof it's there. Just go on your way. No problem. Great question. Sorry, I kind of ripped on it a little bit, but I think I got it. Did I get close? So, all right. What else we got? I think I have any more questions. Oh, y'all gonna say yes, we understand. I would say just remember when you doubt, Jesus is still there to catch you. I'm gonna tell you one aside, a funny story, if you don't mind. There was a guy named Jack Shelton, who was a pastor at First United Methodist Church, Lufkin. And I was just kind of in the midst of really getting serious about exploring my calling to ordained ministry. And he heard from a mother-in-law that I might want to seek ordination as a United Methodist elder. And he knew that he was going to be retiring in a few years. And so he invited me to his library to get a few books. And so I went there and he had me pull out any book I was interested in. And so I went through and I pulled out all these different books in his library. And he would tell me, oh no, this one I'm keeping because I really like it. But why do you like it? And tell me about it. And we went on and kind of went down the road. He gave me a few books and all that was great. So I have to go over for a district committee of ministry as part of the examination of whether or not I'm really being called And on that particular day, I was driving from Austin across to Lufkin. It's not a particularly easy drive. You have to go across the Brazos at one of 2 points, either to the north or south. And it had been raining really badly. There were a lot of storms. Well, the bridge in the south had actually been topped by the water. So I was headed north. And so there's this little place in Hearn I was going. And there was a little overflow where the water was running and you couldn't see the road. And so as I was going, I kind of went far enough that the little car I was in floated for just a second. And I was about to turn around, and then I caught traction and I kept going. And I got lucky. Don't do that. You should never do that. If I didn't have a meeting that if I didn't get to it, I wouldn't get ordained on time. I wouldn't have tried it, right? But anyway, I had done it. I got lucky. It was stupid. I'm saying that because Laura's watching online right now. But as I'm on my way there, I get to the meeting and they're like, "Oh, Brad, we're so glad you made it. We're so glad you're here. The weather was awful, having problems." And I said, "Well, it kind of reminds me of the story of when John Wesley went to St. Ives. He went there, and I was in one of the books I've gotten. I've been reading it, and it talked about John Wesley going to St. Ives. In his ministry, he was always punctual. He had never missed a preaching appointment. And he gets to St. Ives a little bit late. He's trying to get to the preaching place, and he can go by the sea route or the inland route. But the inland route will make him late. He tells the driver to go by the sea route. The whole time, the driver of this carriage that he's in is telling him that that's not going to work, that it's going to flood. When the tide comes in, he's going to wash away and all that. And then he says, "Driver, what is your name?" And the driver says, "Well, my name is Peter." And John Wesley yelled out at him, "Peter, thou shalt not sink." Right? Kind of the story we're reading today. And so I said that at the beginning of this meeting to show off my reading about Wesley and this book my friend had given me. All of a sudden, Jack just says, "Brad, I thought I had heard every story about John Wesley and read everything ever written about it. And I can tell you, I've never heard that story." He said it like he was a little mad, and I didn't know. I was like, "Yeah, it was in the book you gave me out of your library." Well, needless to say, all the other elders that were there just died laughing. All of them had a Jack Shelton story, and I wasn't interviewed at all. They just all took on Jack, so it's kind of fun. Anyway, and just remember, thou shalt not sink, Peter. Hold on to the hem of the garment. Hold on to your hope. Hold on to your faith. It's what matters. Don't let anything keep you from it. So peace.